I'm Chloe, 28 female. I live alone in a small one-bedroom apartment that always smells faintly of oil paints and brewing coffee, which is a combination I've come to associate with home. By trade and by passion, I am a digital artist and illustrator, piecing together a living from freelance commissions and selling prints of my personal work online. My life has always been a quiet battle between the vibrant, colorful worlds I create on my tablet and the muted, grayscale expectations of the family I was born into. This is the story of how I finally learned to stop fighting that battle and instead just painted my own world into existence, leaving them on the outside looking in. Before this story unfolds, I'd love to connect with you. Please let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is in your corner of the world. It's amazing to see how far these stories can travel. In my family, success was a very specific, non-negotiable concept. It was a framed degree from a prestigious university hanging on the wall, a six-figure salary, and a job title you could explain in a single, impressive sentence. My father, Arthur, was a civil engineer. He built bridges, solid structures of concrete and steel that you could see and touch, things he considered real. My older brother, Ethan, was an investment banker. He manipulated markets and moved millions of dollars with a few keystrokes, a modern-day king whose success was measured in quarterly bonuses. Then there was me. I drew pictures. From their perspective, my career was the equivalent of a child showing them a macaroni necklace. They'd pat me on the head, offer a thin, placating smile, and ask when I was going to get a real job. The family portrait was clear. Arthur, the stoic patriarch, my mother, Eleanor, the quiet, supportive wife, Ethan, the golden son and heir to the legacy of practicality, and me, Chloe, the colorful, perplexing smudge in the corner of the frame. My mother was a part-time school librarian, a gentle soul who loved books but had long ago learned that her opinions were secondary to my father's loud, unshakable convictions. She saw my talent, I think, but she lacked the strength to defend it against my father's dismissiveness. Her support came in quiet gestures, a new set of brushes for my birthday, a hushed, "That's beautiful, dear," when my father was out of earshot. It was a timid form of encouragement, easily drowned out. Dinners were the primary stage for this dynamic. I'd sit between the unyielding steel of my father and the polished veneer of my brother, feeling like a foreign exchange student in my own home. A typical Sunday dinner began with my father holding court. "Ethan closed the Henderson deal on Friday," he'd announce, his voice booming with pride. "Pulled in a 17% return in the first quarter. Tell them, son." Ethan, ever the performer, would lean back with a casual smirk, as if he were bored by his own brilliance. "It was straightforward, Dad. The market was predictable. They were lucky to have our firm handling it." He wasn't just successful, he made success look effortless, which was somehow even more impressive to my father. My mother would chime in, "Oh, Ethan, that's wonderful. Your father is so proud of you." It was a well-rehearsed play, and everyone knew their lines. My turn would inevitably come. "And you, Chloe?" my father would ask, turning to me with an expression that was already braced for disappointment. "Still drawing your cartoons?" I learned early on not to share my small victories. The time I got my first paid commission, designing a logo for a local bakery, I made the mistake of announcing it at the table. Ethan had snorted. "How much did they pay you?" $50. It was actually 200, a fortune to me at the time, but I felt a hot flush of shame and mumbled, "Something like that." My father had shaken his head. "It's pocket money, Chloe, a hobby. It's fine to have hobbies, but you're 28. It's time to think about a career, benefits, a 401k, security." The word hobby was his favorite weapon. It was a small, dismissive word that could shrink my entire world, all my passion and hard work, into something insignificant and childish. It was a verbal pat on the head, a way of saying, "That's cute, now let the adults talk." My friend Maya, a pastry chef who had built her own bakery from scratch, was the only one who understood. "They don't get it because they can't quantify it," she told me over coffee one afternoon, her hands dusted with flour. "To them, if it doesn't come with a business card and a predictable salary, it's not real. Your dad builds bridges he can stand on. Your brother makes money you can count. You make feelings visible. That scares people like them." She was right. My work was subjective, emotional. It didn't fit into their spreadsheets. Maya had faced similar skepticism. Her parents had wanted her to be a teacher, a safe and stable profession. When she announced she was going to culinary school to become a pastry chef, they'd reacted with the same bewildered disappointment. Baking? That's a nice hobby, dear. Now, her bakery was one of the most popular in the city, and she was a respected small business owner. She was my proof that it was possible. Her success was a quiet rebellion I deeply admired. The tension in my family was building towards a crescendo. My parents' 35th wedding anniversary was approaching, and they were planning a large party at a fancy downtown restaurant. It was a celebration of their long-lasting, stable union, a monument to the very values I seemed to be rejecting. The invitations were elegant. The guest list was full of my father's business associates and old family friends, and the pressure was on for both of their children to be perfect showcases of their successful parenting. Ethan, of course, was flying in from New York, his attendance a gift in itself. I was just expected to show up and try not to mention my hobby too loudly. I dreaded the event, sensing it would be another stage for the same old play, but this time with a much larger audience. I spent the week before the party working on a special gift for them, a detailed digital portrait of the two of them from their wedding day, meticulously colored and restored from a faded old photograph. I poured dozens of hours into it, hoping that maybe, just maybe, a visual representation of my skill, a piece of art they could frame and hang on the wall, would finally make them see. I wanted them to see my work not as a childish pastime, but as my language, my contribution, my reality. It was a foolish hope, but it was all I had. I carefully printed it on high-quality canvas, framed it, and wrapped it, the gift feeling heavier with my expectations than its actual weight. The night of the anniversary party was cold and clear. The restaurant was exactly as I'd imagined, intimidatingly elegant, with low lighting, starched white tablecloths, and the quiet clinking of expensive silverware. My father's friends, all men in tailored suits who looked like they calculated stock prices in their sleep, clapped him on the back. Their wives, adorned in tasteful jewelry, complimented my mother on her timeless grace. I felt like I was wearing a costume. My dress was nice enough, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was an imposter in this world of concrete achievements. Ethan had arrived, of course, looking like he'd just stepped out of a magazine ad for luxury watches. He was immediately swarmed by relatives who wanted to hear about his latest triumphs on Wall Street. I found a quiet corner and nursed a glass of sparkling water, my wrapped gift leaning against my chair. Maya had texted me just before I left my apartment. "Be strong. You are a phenomenal artist, and their opinion doesn't change that. But also, text me if you need an escape plan." I smiled at my phone. Having her in my corner was like having a secret shield. My mother eventually found me, her expression a familiar mix of pride and anxiety. "Chloe, you look lovely," she said, smoothing a stray piece of my hair. "Are you having a good time?" I gave her a noncommittal smile. "It's a beautiful party, Mom." Her eyes flickered towards the gift at my feet. "Is that for us?" she asked softly. I nodded. "I made something for you." A flicker of genuine warmth crossed her face before it was replaced by a look over her shoulder, as if checking for my father's approval even on this. "That's so thoughtful, dear." The dinner was a blur of polite conversation and rich food. I mostly listened, nodding along as the person next to me, a friend of my father's, complained about city permits for a new construction project. He asked me what I did, and I gave him the vague, practiced answer. "I'm in creative design." It was a safe, corporate-sounding phrase I used to avoid the inevitable follow-up questions and the pitying looks. Finally, after dessert was served, my father stood up, tapping his glass with a spoon. The room fell silent. A warm, proud smile spread across his face as he looked at my mother. He spoke beautifully about their 35 years together, about her being the bedrock of his life, the foundation upon which everything was built. He was a man of structures, and my mother was his most important one. It was genuinely touching, and for a moment I felt a swell of love for him, a hope that tonight might be different. Then he turned his attention to his children. "I am a fortunate man," he began, his voice resonating through the private dining room. Not only have I had a wonderful partner in life, but we have raised two incredible children. My son, Ethan, he beamed, gesturing to my brother, who sat up a little straighter. Ethan is a vice president at one of the top investment firms in the country. He is a testament to what hard work, a sharp mind, and ambition can achieve. He makes his mother an M.E. proud every single day. He builds futures, not with concrete and steel like I do, but with intellect and foresight. He is a true success. A round of applause filled the room. Ethan gave a modest, practiced nod. My father let the applause die down before continuing, his gaze sweeping over the crowd and, for a brief, heavy moment, landing on me. And of course, he said, his tone shifting. It was a subtle change, a dip from booming pride to a kind of amused affection. It was the tone one uses for a beloved but slightly clueless pet. We have our Chloe. He paused, and a few people chuckled softly, already anticipating the punchline. My stomach twisted into a cold, hard knot. I knew what was coming. Chloe is our free spirit, he continued, a wide smile on his face that didn't reach his eyes. She's pursuing her passion for art. And we all think that's wonderful. It's so important to have a hobby, something to keep you busy. The word hung in the air, amplified by the silence of the room. Hobby. He hadn't just said it in the privacy of our home. He had announced it to 50 of their closest friends and colleagues. He had defined me, in this room full of successful people, as a hobbyist, a dabbler, a child. He wasn't done. So let's raise a glass, he said, lifting his champagne flute. To my amazing wife, Alina, to my son, Ethan, and his incredible success, and to Chloe, who we hope one day finds a real path, but for now, we're all very proud of her little hobby. The room echoed with the clinking of glasses and murmurs of "Here, here." No one seemed to notice the cruelty of his words. To them, it was just a father's gentle ribbing. But to me, it was a public execution of my dreams. I felt the blood drain from my face. I could feel dozens of eyes on me, some curious, some pitying. I saw my brother give me a small, smug smirk from across the table. I looked at my mother, who was staring intently at her dessert plate, her face a perfect mask of strained neutrality. She wouldn't meet my eyes. In that moment, her silence was louder than my father's words. It was an act of betrayal. I don't remember the rest of the toast. My mind went quiet, filled with a roaring white noise. I sat through the forced smiles and the pats on my shoulder from well-meaning relatives who said things like, "Don't you worry, you'll figure it out." They were trying to be kind, but all they did was sharpen the edges of my humiliation. I waited for a lull in the conversation, then quietly stood up. I picked up my purse, but I left the gift, my beautiful, framed portrait, leaning against the chair. It felt tainted now, a symbol of my own foolish hope. My mother finally looked up, her eyes wide with alarm. "Chloe, where are you going?" "I'm not feeling well," I whispered, the lie tasting like ash in my mouth. "I'm going home." My father, deep in conversation with a colleague, didn't even notice me leave. I walked out of the restaurant, past the smiling hostess and into the cold night air. Each step away from that room felt like a step toward myself. The battle was over. I wasn't going to fight for their approval anymore. I was just going to leave the battlefield. The drive home was a blur of streetlights and silent tears. Not the loud, messy sobs of simple sadness, but the quiet, hot tears of rage and finality. Every word of my father's toast played on a loop in my head. A real path, little hobby. He hadn't just insulted my work, he had fundamentally invalidated my existence as I had chosen to live it. He had drawn a line in the sand, placing real life, success, and value on one side and me on the other. When I got back to my apartment, the smell of paint and coffee felt less like a comfort and more like a condemnation. Was he right? Was this all just a childish fantasy? I walked over to my drafting table, where a half-finished commission was open on my tablet. For the first time in my life, I felt a deep, profound hatred for my own art. I called Maya. She picked up on the second ring. "Escape plan activated?" she asked, her voice light but ready. I couldn't speak, so I just made a choked sound. Her tone changed instantly. "Chloe, what happened? Are you okay?" Through gritted teeth, I recounted the toast, word for humiliating word. I told her about the pitying looks, my brother's smirk, my mother's silence. I told her how I'd left my gift, the portrait I'd poured my heart into, behind. Maya listened without interrupting, letting my anger and hurt spill out into the phone. When I was done, there was a moment of silence. "I'm coming over," she said. It wasn't a question. 20 minutes later, she was at my door with a box of slightly misshapen croissants from her bakery and a bottle of cheap red wine. She didn't offer platitudes or tell me I was overreacting. She just sat with me on my worn-out sofa, poured 2 glasses of wine, and said, "Your father is an arrogant fool. And your brother is worse." It was exactly what I needed, too. Here. That night, something inside me hardened. The soft, hopeful part of me that had been desperately seeking my family's approval finally withered and died. It was a painful death, but a necessary one. I knew I couldn't continue in this limbo, half dependent on their emotional, and sometimes, I had to admit, financial safety net while pretending their opinions didn't matter. The truth was, they did matter because I let them. My father co-signed the lease on my apartment because my freelance income wasn't stable enough for the landlord. My parents still paid my phone bill, a holdover from a family plan started in my teens. These were not huge things, but they were threads, connections that gave them a perceived right to comment on my life. They were strings that allowed them to treat me like a child. That night, I decided to cut them. All of them. The next morning, I woke up with a grim sense of purpose. My first call was to my landlord. I explained the situation, that I needed my father's name off the lease. I offered to pay 3 months' rent in advance as a show of good faith, a move that would almost completely drain my savings account. To my surprise, he agreed. The second call was to the phone company. I separated my line from the family plan, signing up for my own, more expensive contract. The third and final act was the hardest. I called my parents. My mother answered, her voice trembling with anxiety. "Chloe, we were so worried. Why did you leave? Your father was just, you know how he is." "I know exactly how he is, Mom," I said, my voice cold and steady. "That's the problem. Is he there?" She passed the phone to him. His voice was gruff, unapologetic. "What was all that drama last night? You embarrassed your mother." I took a deep breath. "I am calling to let you know that I have taken your name off my lease and I've separated my phone line. I will not be accepting any more money from you for any reason. You wanted me to find a real path and get a real job. Fine, I'm going to, but I'm going to do it my way and I'm going to do it without you." "Don't be ridiculous," he scoffed. "You can't afford your rent. This is just a little tantrum because your feelings got hurt. I was just being honest." "Someone has to be. Your honesty was a public humiliation," I shot back. "You dismissed my entire life's work as a joke in front of 50 people. So, here's my honesty. I am done. I am done seeking your approval. I am done trying to make you proud. From now on, the only person I'm trying to impress is myself." There was a stunned silence on the other end of the line. I don't think he had ever been spoken to like that before, especially not by me. Before he could formulate a response, I said, "Goodbye, Dad," and I hung up. The immediate aftermath was terrifying. My bank account, after paying the advance rent, was perilously low. The safety net was gone. For the next few months, I lived on instant noodles and cheap coffee. I took on any freelance work I could find, no matter how boring or soul-crushing. I designed cheesy logos for dropshipping companies. I illustrated bland articles for content farms. I drew pet portraits for people on the internet. It was a grind. Every dollar I earned felt like a small victory, a single brick I was laying in the foundation of my own life. My family tried to reach out. My mother would call, leaving tearful voicemails. Ethan sent a single, condescending text. "Heard you're having a little rebellion. Let me know when you're ready to come back to reality." I didn't respond to any of them. The silence was my shield. It was also my canvas. In the quiet, lonely evenings after finishing my mind-numbing freelance work, I started to draw for myself again. But this time, something was different. The art was darker, sharper, more honest. The anger and hurt I felt became fuel. I was no longer trying to create pretty pictures to please anyone. I was creating images that told the truth. My truth. It was a painful, expensive, and lonely independence, but it was mine. The first 6 months of my self-imposed exile were a study in gray. My life narrowed to the 4 walls of my apartment and the glowing rectangle of my computer screen. My days were spent churning out generic commercial art that paid the bills, each project chipping away at my creative spirit. My nights were spent staring at a blank digital canvas, the silence of my apartment amplifying the loud, persistent voice of doubt in my head. Had I made a mistake? Had I let pride push me into a corner I couldn't escape? The financial pressure was immense. There were weeks I barely slept, fueled by caffeine and anxiety, taking on rush jobs just to make rent. My social life evaporated. The only person I saw regularly was Maya, who would show up unannounced with a bag of day-old pastries and a refusal to take no for an answer. She would sit on my sofa, not pushing me to talk, and simply work on her laptop, providing a silent, comforting presence that kept the loneliness from completely consuming me. It was during one of those bleak, quiet nights that something shifted. I had just finished a particularly awful project, a series of overly cheerful cartoon animals for a dental clinic's website. I felt empty, like a machine. I closed the file, leaned back in my chair, and for the first time in months, I opened a personal project folder. I didn't have a plan. I just started to draw. What came out was a raw, unfiltered expression of my feelings. I drew a young woman at a long dining table, but she was rendered in faint, almost transparent lines, while the other figures at the table were bold, solid, and opaque. I called it the ghost at the feast. The next night, I drew another. It depicted a girl trying to show her parents a vibrant, colorful painting, but their eyes were fixed on a gray, boring spreadsheet in front of them. I called it the currency of approval. Night after night, this became my ritual. After the paying work was done, I would dive into this new series. I wasn't trying to create something beautiful or marketable. I was just trying to be honest. The series, which I started calling Family Portraits, became a visual diary of my isolation and resentment. I explored themes of conditional love, the weight of expectations, and the quiet pain of being misunderstood by those who are supposed to know you best. The style was different from anything I had done before. It was less polished, more emotional. I used stark contrasts, muted color palettes punctuated by a single, vibrant splash of defiant color, and character expressions that were subtly heartbreaking. This work was for me and me alone. It was my therapy, my way of processing the humiliation and finding my own voice in the deafening silence my family had left behind. After a few months, I had a collection of about a dozen of these pieces. Maya saw them by accident one day when she glanced at my screen. She stopped what she was doing and just stared. "Chloe," she said, her voice soft with awe, "what is this?" I felt a flush of embarrassment. "It's nothing, just stuff I'm working on." "No," she said, pulling my chair back so she could see the whole collection. "This isn't stuff. This is important. This is real." Her validation was like a drink of water after a long thirst. She encouraged me to do something with them, to put them out into the world. I resisted at first. They felt too personal, too raw, like exposing a wound. But she was persistent. "The most personal art is the most universal," she argued. "You have to share this." Hesitantly, I created a new, separate online portfolio, away from my commercial work. I posted the Family Portraits series with short, simple captions. I didn't promote it. I just put it out there and walked away, half expecting and half hoping no one would ever see it. For a week, nothing happened. Then, one morning, I woke up to an email with the subject line, "Your Family Portraits series." My heart pounded as I opened it. It was from the curator of a popular online art blog known for discovering emerging artists. She had stumbled upon my portfolio and was captivated. She wrote, "Your work is brutally honest and profoundly relatable. It captures a modern sense of familial alienation that is rarely depicted with such nuance and skill. May we feature your series on our site?" I felt a dizzying mix of terror and elation. I agreed. The feature went live a week later. The response was immediate and overwhelming. My inbox was flooded with messages from people all over the world. "It feels like you drew my childhood," one wrote. "I cried looking at the ghost at the feast." "I've been that ghost," wrote another. The series had struck a nerve. It was shared across social media, and suddenly, my quiet, personal project was the subject of a global conversation. The validation was intoxicating, but it was different from the approval I had once craved from my family. This wasn't about impressing anyone. This was about connecting with people who understood. My art had found its home, not on my parents' wall, but in the hearts of strangers. A few weeks later, another email arrived. It was from a small but highly respected contemporary gallery in the city. The owner had seen the blog feature. She wanted to know if I had ever considered a solo exhibition. Reading those words, my hands started to shake. The colors of solitude were finally starting to form a rainbow. The months leading up to the exhibition were a whirlwind of focused, frantic energy. The gallery owner, a sharp and insightful woman named Isabel, became my champion. She didn't just give me a date, she gave me guidance and, most importantly, belief. "Don't soften the edges, Chloe," she advised during one of our meetings. "The power of your work is in its unflinching honesty. Lean into it." And so I did. I expanded the family portraits series, creating larger, more ambitious pieces. I poured all the pain, the loneliness, and the eventual empowerment of the past year onto the digital canvas. My apartment, once a prison of solitude, transformed into a sanctuary of creation. I worked with a fervor I had never known, driven by a new kind of fuel, not the desperate need for approval, but the quiet confidence of self-expression. I was no longer just an artist, I was a storyteller, and this was the story I was born to tell. I didn't tell my family. The thought flickered through my mind once or twice, a residual habit of wanting to share big news, but I quickly extinguished it. This success was mine. It was born in the silence they had created, and I felt fiercely protective of it. It had nothing to do with them. Maya was my rock through it all. She helped me frame the prints, brought me meals when I forgot to eat, and was the one who forced me to buy a new dress for the opening night. "You are not showing up to your first solo exhibition looking like a tired hermit," she declared, dragging me to a boutique. "You are showing up as the successful, brilliant artist you are." The night of the opening arrived. Standing outside the gallery, my heart hammered against my ribs. The windows were lit up, and through the glass I could see my own work hanging on the clean, white walls. It looked real, more real than any of my father's bridges. Taking a deep breath, I walked inside. The space was already buzzing with people. There were artists, critics, collectors, and curious strangers, all wandering through the room, looking at my art. They stood in front of the pieces, heads tilted, whispering to each other. I saw a woman standing in front of the ghost at the feast, her hand covering her mouth, her eyes filled with tears. I saw a young man nod slowly as he studied the currency of approval. They weren't just looking, they were feeling. They understood. Isabel found me and squeezed my arm. "They love it, Chloe, I knew they would." Throughout the evening, people came up to me, their voices full of genuine emotion. They didn't just say, "Congratulations." They shared their own stories. They told me about their own fathers, their own golden child siblings, their own struggles to be seen. My intensely personal narrative had become a shared experience. I felt a sense of connection that was more profound than any family tie I had ever known. Halfway through the evening, Isabel pulled me aside with a wide grin. "See that man in the corner?" she whispered, gesturing towards a distinguished-looking older gentleman. "That's Julian Croft, the art critic for the City Chronicle." My blood ran cold. Croft was notoriously difficult to please. A bad review from him could sink a new artist. He spent a long time in front of each piece, his expression unreadable. I tried my best to ignore him, but I felt his analytical gaze on my work for the rest of the night. But the most surreal moment came when Isabel approached me again, this time with a small, red dot sticker in her hand. "Congratulations," she said, her eyes twinkling. "We just sold a toast to my humiliation." It was one of my most recent and most painful pieces. It depicted a young woman at a party, rendered in full, vibrant color, while everyone around her faded into a gray, featureless background. Their champagne glasses were raised, but they were toasting a ghost. The price we had set for it was ambitious, a number that had seemed laughably optimistic at the time. It was more money than I had ever made in a single year of freelance work. Soon, another red dot went up, and then another. By the end of the night, more than half of the pieces had sold. I felt lightheaded, a giddy sense of disbelief washing over me. The next morning, I woke up feeling like I was in a dream. I made coffee and with trembling hands opened my laptop to the City Chronicle's website. Julian Croft's review was the lead story in the arts section. The headline read, "A picture of perfection, Chloe's family portraits is a triumphant debut." My eyes scanned the text, my heart pounding. He called the series a masterclass in visual storytelling and praised its raw, emotional honesty and technical brilliance. He concluded the review with a sentence that I would remember for the rest of my life. Chloe is not just an emerging artist to watch, she is a vital new voice, reminding us that the most powerful art is that which turns personal pain into universal truth. I read it once, then twice, then a third time, letting the words sink in. My father built bridges of concrete. My brother built fortunes of numbers. But according to the most respected critic in the city, I had built a bridge of truth. And that felt more real, more solid, and more valuable than anything they could ever comprehend. The exhibition was a success, but more than that, it was my validation, earned on my own terms. The year that followed the exhibition was a complete redrawing of my life. The glowing review from Julian Croft acted as a key, unlocking doors I never knew existed. My name, once only known to a handful of online clients, was suddenly being mentioned in the same breath as established artists. The success of the Family Portraits series was a launching pad. I was approached by a prestigious creative agency that wanted to represent me. They saw the potential to translate my unique, emotive style into high-concept commercial work. Suddenly, the soul-crushing freelance jobs were replaced by exciting, high-profile commissions from brands that wanted my specific voice, not just a generic illustration. I designed a campaign for a national mental health awareness organization. I created the cover art for a best-selling novel. I was invited to give talks at art schools. My income grew exponentially, eclipsing anything I had ever imagined. I moved out of my small, cramped apartment and into a bright, airy loft with enough space for a proper studio. The faint smell of paint and coffee was still there, but it was now mingled with the scent of success. I paid off my student loans, built a robust savings account, and hired a financial advisor. The irony was not lost on me. I was becoming the person my father always wanted me to be: successful, financially secure, and independent. I had just achieved it not by abandoning my passion, but by embracing it more fiercely than ever before. Throughout this meteoric rise, I maintained my silence with my family. I knew they must have heard about my success. The Chronicle review alone would have been impossible to miss, and I was sure some well-meaning relative had sent them the link. But I never reached out, and for a long time, they didn't either. I imagined their confusion, their inability to reconcile the daughter they dismissed as a hobbyist with the artist being celebrated in the city's most respected newspaper. The silence was finally broken almost 2 years after the anniversary party. It came in the form of an email, not a phone call. The sender was Arthur. My heart did a strange little flip-flop in my chest, a mix of old anxiety and new, detached curiosity. The subject line simply read, "A project." I clicked it open. The email was stiff and formal, devoid of any personal warmth. There was no apology, no acknowledgement of the past 2 years. It was as if our last conversation had never happened. He wrote that his engineering firm was part of a consortium bidding on a major urban renewal project, a new riverfront development with parks, residential buildings, and a cultural center. It was the biggest project of his career, his legacy project. He mentioned that the final presentation to the city council required visionary concept art to help them visualize the emotional and community impact of the design. Then came the sentence that made me laugh out loud, a short, sharp bark of disbelief. "I have been told that you have become quite proficient in this area." Proficient, as if I'd been practicing my scales and had finally learned to play a simple tune. The email continued, explaining that they needed a series of high-quality illustrations to be the centerpiece of their pitch. It was a huge undertaking with a tight deadline. He concluded the email with a line that perfectly encapsulated his entire worldview. "Ethan and I were discussing it, and we agree this would be a wonderful opportunity for you to contribute something tangible to a real-world family endeavor. Let me know when you would be available to discuss the details." It wasn't a job offer. It was a summons, an opportunity for me to finally do something real. He wasn't commissioning an artist. He was calling in a favor from his hobbyist daughter, assuming she'd be grateful for the chance to play in the big leagues. I stared at the email for a long time, a slow-burning anger mixing with a sense of profound, almost comical, vindication. They hadn't come back with an apology. They hadn't come back with pride. They came back because they needed something. My little hobby had suddenly become a valuable asset they wanted to leverage for their own gain. The audacity was breathtaking. I thought about deleting the email, about letting it hang in the digital ether forever, a final, unanswered testament to our estrangement. But that felt too passive. It felt like hiding. I had spent the last 2 years building a career and a life based on my own terms. This was the ultimate test. I took a deep breath, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. I wasn't the girl who fled a party in tears anymore. I was the owner of a successful creative business, and it was time to act like one. I wrote back a short, professional reply. Thank you for reaching out. My representative at the creative agency handles all my commission inquiries. I have forwarded your email to her. She will be in touch to schedule a preliminary meeting to discuss the scope and budget of the project. I hit send. The ball was in their court. Now, but we were no longer playing their game. We were playing mine. The meeting was set for the following week. My agent, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Olivia, insisted we host it at my studio. Home turf, she'd said. Let them come to you. It establishes the power dynamic from the start. I agreed. On the day of the meeting, I was a bundle of nerves, but it was a different kind of anxiety than I was used to. It wasn't the fear of disapproval. It was the nervous energy of a CEO before a big negotiation. I had spent the morning preparing with Olivia, who had already done her research on the Riverfront project and standard industry rates for such a high-profile commission. We had a number in mind, a number that was fair, professional, and, I knew, would likely make my father's head spin. At precisely 2 p.m., the buzzer rang. It was my father and Ethan. I let them in and they stepped into my studio. I watched them as they took in the scene. The huge, floor-to-ceiling windows, the expensive equipment, the large-scale prints of my work hanging on the walls, the framed Chronicle review given a place of honor. Their faces were a study in barely concealed shock. They had probably still pictured me in my tiny, dark apartment, struggling to make rent. This space, bright, successful, and unapologetically mine, did not compute. My father cleared his throat, his eyes awkwardly darting around the room, avoiding looking directly at my art. Ethan, ever composed, had a flicker of something I couldn't quite decipher in his eyes. Was it surprise? Envy? Nice place, Chloe, he said, the words sounding hollow. The hobby seems to be paying for itself. Old habits died hard. It's a business, Ethan, I replied coolly, gesturing for them to sit at the large conference table in the center of the room. And this is my office. Olivia joined us, shaking their hands with a firm, professional grip. She immediately took control of the meeting, her presence radiating competence. She began by outlining the standard process for a commission of this scale, discussing deliverables, timelines, and revision rounds. My father and brother looked slightly taken aback, clearly having expected a casual family chat, not a formal business meeting. My father shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Look, we don't need all this, he said, waving a dismissive hand. This is a family matter. Chloe knows what we need. We need some nice pictures of the project, something with heart. Olivia smiled, a thin, polished smile that didn't reach her eyes. With all due respect, Mr. Arthur, what you need is a comprehensive creative package for a multi-million-dollar development bid. That requires a detailed brief, a clear contract, and professional compensation. Now let's talk about the budget. She slid a folder across the table. Inside was our standard proposal, complete with a detailed cost breakdown. I watched my father's face as he opened it. His eyes scanned the pages, his brow furrowing deeper with every line item. He finally got to the last page, to the total project fee. He stared at it for a long moment, then let out a short, sharp laugh of disbelief. You cannot be serious, he said, looking at me for the first time. This is an astronomical sum. This is absurd. Ethan leaned over to look, and his eyes widened. Chloe, this is ridiculous, he said, his voice laced with the old, familiar condescension. We're your family. We're giving you a chance to be part of the most important project of Dad's career. This was the moment, the culmination of everything. I took a slow, deliberate breath and leaned forward, my hands folded calmly on the table. "Let me be very clear," I began, my voice even and strong. "For years, both of you dismissed my work. You called it a hobby, a joke. You never once came to an art show, bought a print, or offered a single word of genuine encouragement. You humiliated me in front of your friends and treated my life's passion as a childish phase I needed to outgrow." I looked directly at my father. "You told me to find a real path." "Well, I did. This," I said, gesturing around the studio, "is my real path. This is my business. The prices in that proposal are my standard rates for a project of this magnitude. They are, in fact, the same rates I'm charging the multinational corporation I'm currently contracted with." I paused, letting the weight of my words sink in. "You are not here as family offering me an opportunity. You are here as potential clients. And frankly, after years of disrespect, you are clients I have very little interest in working with." My father was speechless, his face turning a blotchy red. Ethan started to argue. "That's not fair, Chloe." "Fair?" I cut him off. "Was it fair when you smirked at me while Dad called my career a joke? Was it fair that neither of you bothered to call for 2 years until you needed something? My art suddenly became proficient and real the moment it became useful to you. Why price is not just for the illustrations. It's the price for my time, my skill, my hard-earned reputation, and it's non-negotiable." I stood up, signaling the end of the meeting. "I believe we're done here. Olivia can validate your parking." They sat there for another moment, stunned into silence. Finally, my father stood, his shoulders slumped in a way I had never seen before. He looked old. He looked defeated. They walked out of my studio without another word. As the door clicked shut behind them, I didn't feel triumph or glee. I felt a quiet, profound sense of peace. The war was over because I had simply refused to fight anymore. My masterpiece was never a single painting. It was the life I had built. It was my studio, my business, my friendship with Maya, my connection with people who saw and valued me. It was the quiet confidence of knowing my own worth, independent of anyone else's validation. A few weeks later, I heard through the grapevine that their firm lost the riverfront bid. Their presentation, apparently, lacked vision. That evening, I stood in my studio, looking out at the city lights, and I started sketching on my tablet. Not for a client, not for a gallery, but for me. I was drawing a new family portrait, one with me at the center, surrounded by friends, my work, and a future I was painting myself, one beautiful, honest brushstroke at a time.